Hi, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Kutarna. Welcome to this Catholic Business Wisdom series. I have a special guest today, Jonathan O'Dwyer. He's an interesting guy. He's a husband and a father of five children, and he's the CEO of a chemical company. And so we're going to talk today about Jonathan's faith journey and a little bit about business and how it can be applied to the Catholic family life that we're all experiencing these days. Jonathan, how are you today?
Doing great. How about you, Henry?
Well, I'm doing great too. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm happy that we're able to do this. We've seen each other at church once in a while, and so I'm glad that we are able to finally do this. So let's, Jonathan, get started right off the bat by asking you, tell us about your faith journey. What have you been doing as a Catholic, and how did it all come about? And what is your faith story?
Sure, Henry. So for me, probably like a lot of folks, cradle Catholic from South Louisiana. And to be fair, I mean, most everyone that I knew was in the same situation as me. In fact, it was probably a bit later in life before I realized that there was any other faith besides Catholicism. It seemed to be that I was surrounded by Catholics whose families' generations have gone in the past, right? That all grew up Catholic. Um, Now, to be fair, right, you move in your high school years and college years, and I probably wasn't, what's the right word, the most fervent of Catholics in those years. But I always had a love, I guess, and appreciation for the saints. In particular, Pope John Paul II, when I was young, and he was Pope at the time, and he had the World Youth Day here in the U.S. And so that was kind of felt like struck a passion and a love for Pope John Paul II at the time, who obviously now is a saint. My youngest son is named after him, and so clearly an appreciation that was developed and built there. And then another thing for me was just the history and tradition of the church that dates back over 2,000 years. Always really kind of tugged at my heart and kept me close, even in some of those years where you're faced with a lot of new and let's say new ideas and new things that are happening and dramatically changing in your life as you're growing up and really working and determining how to really become a man in this world. And so for me, though, I remained a churchgoer throughout all those years, my college years as well. My faith really kind of began to grow as I began dating my now wife in 2005, and especially after we were married in 2007, and then started talking about children and starting our life together and what we want that to be centered and focused on. So we kind of kept coming back. She was also a cradle Catholic, grew up right across the street from a Catholic church with multi generations living next door to one another. So that's where we got married, and to this day, all of our five children have been baptized in that church where we got married, and my wife was baptized, and many others in her family. So that connection, I think, is just important for us to stay grounded in history, both ours as well as that of the churches. Really, the next big catalyst for me in terms of my faith journey is when we moved to the Charlotte area in 2016. On occasion, we attended a more traditional church in the Charlotte area that offered the traditional Latin Mass. And that
Yes.
kind of really timed up for me also with a bit of a break in my career that gave me more time for reading, reflecting, studying my faith, attending daily Mass that I had not done, I don't believe, maybe ever. And then honestly, I think one of the big pieces there was around more routine confessions that not only myself but my family and we committed to, and I think that also was a big part of drawing us in even deeper into the church and into our faith, and a lot of things have continued to grow and ebb and flow and develop from there, but certainly it's gotten deeper and richer over those last years as we built our family out as well, and something that we want to pass on to them.
It's great to hear this, and of course, I have met your family, and so I can see that you're a faithful Catholic living the faith, and so that's really that's an exemplary Catholic leader right there for you. So let's talk, Jonathan, about an aspect of your life. I know that you could say you're in the corporate world, you are a CEO of a company, and I know that you have in the past had experiences in smaller, perhaps family-owned businesses, as well as in the Fortune 500 kind of corporate world. So many people, many Catholics and others will say, how can you be Catholic and work in the corporate world and be a CEO and do all those things that the company wants you to do? So maybe could you comment about that? That seems like the number one question. How can you do both, Jonathan?
Well, I would say it's question how is one thing, but I think the answer is you must do both, right? You can't compartmentalize, I don't believe, and be successful in either one. So to me, they must go hand in hand. And when there's a conflict, clearly one should always prevail over the other. In that case, it should be your faith, right? And staying true to that. Um, so I think for me, that's generally how I think about it. It's not an either or; it's a both and scenario. And where there's conflict, certainly pray about it and certainly seek out advice from others who are maybe wiser than you are, who've been through those challenges in the past, and explain that situation. And then you've got to navigate your own path once you get the input, right? So you've got to be the one responsible to make the decisions and ultimately chart that path for you, for your career, and making sure that you're staying true to who you are and to your faith as well. You mentioned, obviously, I've been in, say, both worlds, corporate America, working for a Fortune 500 company in the past. There were plenty of challenges there in terms of maybe a crossroads between faith and company, but that's not unlike similar challenges that you face in smaller companies. I am now with a that was a previously family-owned company, but now private equity-owned, and so
Yes.
so there are some interesting aspects of being a part of a once family-owned company for almost 50 years, while now being different, having a different ownership structure, and so being able to navigate that world of between family-owned legacy, history, DNA of the people that still are part of that company, and then with the new ownership, which I honestly find though is pretty easy to mesh together. I'd say a bit easier than the Fortune 500 corporate America world, in my experience, at least personally. As the CEO, I do get a fair amount of latitude to manage the company, manage the business in the way that I deem most appropriate. And for me, as I mentioned earlier, right, a big part of who I am and how I make decisions and why I make the decisions that I do, or because of my faith and as a Catholic. And so I think they help to influence that. And I think if you ask folks that I work with today, they would certainly, one of the things they would probably say first is that, well, we know that he's Catholic because he speaks about his faith here at work. And I'm proud of that. I think that's an important part of what we can do as Catholics is to let that be known. It's not a Sunday for a 1 hour only kind of experience. It's not just purely personal and private. I think it needs to be public, and that's an important part of what we can do.
Just a brief interruption. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Kutarna. In business, sometimes it's difficult to tell your employee exactly what the problem is. Many bosses, many leaders, many CEOs are afraid of this conversation, and it's difficult to do. We've created something called the microscopic truth conversation, which I think you'll appreciate. It's a way to zero in on the exact problem that the employee is demonstrating, and it's a way of changing that behavior. So check it out. It's a free download. Click on the QR code and you'll get it right away. Now back to the show. It's interesting about the latitude that you have. So you're the boss, right? You're the
Mhm.
boss, and I presume you might have a board, you might have other people still above you in the structure, in the hierarchy, but you're the boss, and more or less. So you've got latitude, and that means that if I understand you right, you're able to then do things that are fair and just and right and true, and so therefore you can be Catholic in your leadership. What would you say, Jonathan, to somebody? We have friends of the Catholic CEO that are young men in their 30s, let's say, they're starting a family, they're married, they have some children. They're in the middle, though. They're not the boss, they're not the CEO. They're in the corporate ranks. And then something might happen. They might be asked to do something inimical to the faith, or there might be some sort of a challenge put in front of them where they have to choose between the faith and the job, you might say. What would you say to that young person about how do you live your faith if you're in that middle rank as opposed to the boss? And we'll talk about your role in a second as the boss, but what about that for the young person who's in the middle ranks of a corporation?
Yeah, I think a big part of that stays consistent though, Henry, regardless of where you're at. And part of that is really being pointing towards the truth. At the end of the day, that's what you've got to stay focused on. The truth and nothing but, in terms of principles, integrity, just honestly, it can't be compromised, because I think if you ever do move into that gray area, it becomes a trap, right? And then others that you're working with see that as well, and I think you lose trust, and that's a very big problem as you move up the ranks, is if you lose the trust and people don't really know who you are. So I think if you stay grounded in what my wife always loves to say, which is the good, true, and the beautiful, right? In this case, certainly truth playing a big part of that, is kind of that bedrock of, if you focus on that, and that's always kind of your compass pointing north, and that is the guiding principle of how you go about making from the littlest decisions to the most important big decisions, and that's consistent throughout. I think you'll set yourself up for long-term success. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges along the way. There always are, whether regardless of how you go about doing things, there are going to be challenges. But the one thing that I think at the end of the day, if you focus on truth, you can be in more control of charting your own destiny, I believe, and feel good about that destiny that you and that foundation you've laid, and where you're trying to go and what you're trying to accomplish.
Interesting about, in other words, you're not saying that you hide your faith. I know you would never say that, but
Hmm.
it's not about hiding the faith, but it's about exuding a certain kind of principled approach, speaking the truth always, being fair and just and things like that. And so that's the message that you're giving to, say, a young person in the corporate ladder, somewhere in the lower ranks or the mid ranks before they end up as the boss. Let's ask you a question then about, you're a CEO and you have experience in leading people, and you have a corporate course to chart, and you have certain objectives that you have to meet. Have you ever been in your life, pressed to the wall by sort of having to choose between your faith and your work?
So it's an interesting question, Henry. I'll say this: I've never been pressed to the point of having to make a ultimatum, but certainly there's been encouragement, and let's say some strong encouragement in some areas when I was still in corporate America. And for me, those were just non-tenable. I would not
Mhm.
compromise. Some of that was driven from corporate. Some of that was driven just by the way others around me were acting and behaving, and focused on climbing the corporate ladder. And you had a choice to make. You could either play the game, or you could stay true to who you were. And however the cards fell, they did. And for me,
Mhm.
that's when I realized it was time for me to exit corporate America, because of the direction that it was heading. And so I made a pivot in my career at that point in time, and realized that probably smaller companies had a little more latitude and less pressure, if you will, in that space.
Yes.
And so that's where I made a conscious choice to have a change in my career. But also, regardless of where you are, big company, small company, starting out early in the ranks, or CEO, I think staying true to knowing what grounds you in your faith is really the most important thing that you can do, as you grow in your career, as you grow personally, as you grow professionally, and develop. Is Once someone told me, you'll never have to remember what you said if you always tell the truth.
Yeah, such a
So
great phrase, isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
So here's you have 5 children, and there are others watching and listening to us today, and they're thinking, okay, what do I say to my college-aged son or daughter who's considering a career in business? Maybe there's a family business out there
Mhm.
that's got a multi-generational approach to things. What advice does a parent, what advice, how can you prepare your child, your son or your daughter for the questions that you have faced successfully in your
Mhm.
life? What do you say to the young people? Do you say yes, go into corporate America, or do you say, don't? And I'm not trying to feed you, an answer, but what do you say to families? Because that's a key question for
Mhm.
everybody. There are people who say, why should I send my son or my daughter into the college world where there's going to be some indoctrination, let us say, and maybe the corporate life is not going to be, faithful to the true and beautiful and good.
Yeah, it's I think a great question, Henry, and one that not only myself, but I'm sure a lot of folks, probably in the last 10 years, even more so than prior to, are wrestling with that, as we all have kind of seen where things have evolved to. Um, I would say, though, I think completely abandoning and becoming isolated from society and from the world is not what we're called to do in a broad sense. For some, that may be the answer, certainly. Um, but I think staying engaged, staying involved, and really leading with principle and leading with faith and leading with integrity and humility, I think can help to bring that back to corporate America, where maybe we've lost a bit of that in terms of the foundational principles that this country, I believe, was founded on. And I think we'll get back to that at some point in time. Maybe not within my lifetime, but I sure hope so. And so we all have a part to play. We all have a role to play, I think. And our kids going to school, if we've educated them at home as the primary educators, especially with regards to faith, and given them a very solid foundation, and being there with them in that journey and helping to support them in that process so that they also can remain true, faithful Catholics in their journey out into this world. Because one way or another, we're going to, I think, encounter the world. And so, better to be prepared than not, in my opinion. And I think, but staying connected with our children. My oldest is only just turning 13, so we're embarking on that now. But also reflecting back for me, growing up and going off to college and into corporate America is is something that I think about a lot. And what do I want to do different? What do I want to do the same with regards to my experience? Right? How do I want to improve upon that for my kids? One, yes, to make sure they get the education that they need in order to achieve their goals, but ultimately doing that also with the primary focus being on their faith and how do they live a truly authentic Catholic life.
Exactly. Now, you and I have, offline, we have talked about how important it is to surround your children with other families, whether they're
Mhm.
in school or whether they're at the parish or whether they're in community activities, sports, etc., to surround them with people of character, families of good character as well. So I imagine you're saying that as well. And how do you do that?
Absolutely. So, one of the first things we have done, my wife and I, we have moved, I believe it's 5 times now since we've been married
Mhm.
because of my job, relocations. And so, one of the first things that we've done since having children is when we find out the city, the first thing we do is tour churches and Catholic schools, right? And we're looking for a number of things there, either on the website or when we go to visit. How how, in terms of offering adoration, in terms of offering confession, right? So those are things that we're looking for to help identify um, what I would say the best Catholic parishes for us in terms of what we want our kids to experience. And if that is the case, then those are the areas that we're looking to relocate to. And so we will move and buy homes that accommodate that, at the sacrifice of if I need to drive longer. And then that is really in hopes of that we're going to be able to surround ourselves and our children with good families, right? Good peers that they can grow up with. And then hopefully that then supports their development, right? Both at home within our oversight, but also with their friends, because they do spend an exorbitant amount of time at school with friends, with teachers, right? So those are important people and groups within their lives, as well as is the direct family.
Yes, wonderful. Well, Jonathan, the time has flown. As I always find with these conversations, we could go on and on, but we've promised our audience that we will do brief clips of these interviews. I'm going to close us by asking you. Normally, I ask people who have an apostolate or a mission, how can we support you? And I know that you're in the private business world, so there's no support that we're going to ask of you except, support your business, I suppose. But what would you say that you'd like to promote to our audience? What's important to you?
So I think for me, extremely important is Catholic education, right? And whether that is a family's choice from homeschooling or from the more traditional Catholic education, brick and mortar school, I think supporting Catholic education, however you're called to do, wherever you're at in life at this point in time, I think is critically important to ensuring the generations to come have a very strong, vibrant Catholic faith and education system that are interconnected, and that can really help to develop Catholic leaders of tomorrow.
Great. I couldn't have said it better, and I appreciate that you've focused on that. So I'd like to say God bless you and your family and your business and all of the things that you do in life, Jonathan, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate it. God bless you as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.